The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floors of the empty dining room, but Marcus Wellington couldn't hear the soft tinkle of its delicate prisms, swaying in the air conditioning's breeze. He couldn't hear much of anything anymore, and lately he'd begun to wonder if the silence that had stolen his hearing had somehow stolen his humanity too. At 63, with a fortune that could buy small countries and a mansion that echoed with loneliness, Marcus had perfected the art of dining alone. His chef prepared five-star meals that he ate in systematic silence, his only companions the ghosts of choices he'd made and bridges he'd burned. But on one unremarkable Tuesday evening, when a cleaning lady's baby reached out tiny fingers toward his face and did something that defied all logic, Marcus Wellington's carefully constructed world of isolation would shatter like the finest porcelain, revealing that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths about what it means to be truly alive. Marcus hadn't always been deaf. He hadn't always been alone either. 20 years ago, he'd been a real estate mogul with a wife who laughed like wind chimes and a daughter whose eyes sparkled with possibility. But ambition had been a hungry beast, demanding more time, more deals, more everything, until one day he looked up from his desk and realized they were gone. The divorce papers had been delivered to his office. He'd signed them during a conference call, multitasking even his marriage's ending. The hearing loss came gradually, then suddenly, the way important things often do. First, the high notes disappeared. His daughter's voice on the phone, the birds outside his window, the sound of rain. Then the rest followed until the world became a silent film, where he was both the sole audience and the forgotten actor. He could have gotten hearing aids, could have learned sign language, could have built bridges back to people. Instead, Marcus built walls. Now his days followed a rigid pattern. Wake at 6, coffee in the sunroom, reading the Wall Street Journal on his tablet. Meetings with his financial advisors conducted entirely through email and written notes. Lunch alone, more work, dinner at 8 sharp in the vast dining room that could seat 24 but only ever held one. He'd dismissed most of his staff over the years, preferring the company of silence to the awkwardness of communication. Only his chef, his personal assistant, and the cleaning service remained, and he'd arranged his schedule to minimize even those interactions. On this particular Tuesday, his assistant had left him a note that the regular cleaning lady, Mrs. Patterson, was ill. Her replacement would be finishing the evening shift. Marcus had merely nodded at the paper, relieved he wouldn't have to make eye contact or attempt conversation. He was methodically cutting into his filet mignon. When he felt it, that subtle change in air pressure that told him someone had entered the room, he looked up, irritation flashing across his features. The new cleaning lady stood in the doorway, and immediately Marcus could see she was trouble. Not because she looked troublesome, in fact, her gentle brown eyes held only apology, but because strapped to her chest in one of those fabric baby carriers was an infant. Marcus's jaw tightened. He pointed firmly at the door, then at his watch. The universal gesture for come back later. But the woman, whose name tag read Rosa, shook her head. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed something, turning the screen toward him. "So sorry. Mr. Wellington, Mrs. Patterson said emergency only tonight. Babysitter cancelled. I work fast. Stay quiet, please." Every instinct told Marcus to fire her on the spot. His home was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. Children were chaos incarnate, all noise and need and disruption. But something in Rosa's face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to carry, more than just the weight of her baby, made him pause. He gave one sharp nod and returned to his meal, making it clear that this was a one-time exception. Rosa moved through the room like a ghost, dusting and straightening with practiced efficiency. The baby, surprisingly, remained quiet, just a small bundle against her chest with a shock of dark, hair visible above the carrier's edge. Marcus tried to ignore them both, but he found his eyes drawn to the infant despite himself. How old? 6 months? 7? He realized with sudden shame that he couldn't remember how old his own daughter had been when he'd missed her first word. because of a business trip to Singapore. He was reaching for his wine glass when it happened. The baby's head turned, and suddenly Marcus found himself locked in the gaze of the most intense pair of brown eyes he'd ever seen. The infant was staring at him with an expression that seemed far too knowing for someone so small. Then, impossibly, the baby smiled. Not a gas smile or a random infant expression, but a deliberate, joyful smile aimed directly at him. Marcus froze. In his world of silence and isolation, that smile crashed through his defenses like a wrecking ball through rice paper. The baby's tiny hands emerged from the carrier, reaching toward him with that absolute trust that only infants possess. Fingers opening and closing in the universal gesture of "pick me up." Marcus looked around helplessly, but Rosa had moved into the adjoining room, visible through the doorway but focused on her work, trying to give him privacy. He should ignore this. He should motion Rosa back. He should do anything except what he did next, which was to slowly stand and walk toward the baby. Up close he could see she was a girl, with those luminous eyes and perfect rosebud lips. She looked at him not with fear or uncertainty, but with pure, uncomplicated delight, as if Marcus Wellington, cold, isolated, difficult Marcus Wellington, was the most wonderful thing she'd ever seen. The baby's fingers brushed his cheek, and Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Her touch was feather-light, exploratory, gentle. Then she did the unthinkable. She began to move her hands in deliberate patterns against his face, her fingers tracing his features with curious precision. And Marcus, who had refused to learn sign language, who had rejected every accommodation and adaptation, suddenly recognized what he was seeing. This baby was deaf. Rosa rushed back into the room, her face apologetic and worried, clearly afraid the baby was bothering him. But Marcus held up a hand, stopping her. With shaking fingers he typed on his phone, "Your daughter is deaf?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. She typed back, "Born deaf. Doctors say she'll learn sign language. I'm learning too. We'll be okay." Marcus looked at this woman, this cleaning lady who was probably making minimum wage, who had to bring her baby to work because she couldn't afford childcare, who was facing a lifetime of challenges and expenses and difficulties with nothing but determination and love. And he thought about himself, with all his millions, who had chosen isolation over adaptation, loneliness over effort. The baby was still touching his face, her fingers now patting his cheeks in a rhythm that seemed almost like she was trying to tell him something. In his silent world, Marcus suddenly felt a connection he hadn't experienced in decades. This child, who would grow up in silence just as he now lived, wasn't afraid. She was curious, joyful, open, everything he had forgotten how to be. He looked at Rosa and typed, "What's her name?" "Luna," Rosa typed back. "It means moon. My grandmother said even in darkness the moon gives light." Marcus felt his eyes burn. When had he last cried? His wedding day. His daughter's birth? He couldn't remember. But now, tears traced unfamiliar paths down his weathered cheeks as this baby girl named Luna patted his face and smiled, completely unaware that she was performing a miracle. He typed rapidly, "I want to help, please let me help." Rosa's face showed confusion and worry. She typed, "Mr. Wellington, I don't want charity. I just need this job." Marcus shook his head forcefully. He typed, "Not charity. I was deaf too. I am deaf, but I gave up. I chose to be alone. Luna shouldn't have to struggle like I see her mother struggling. Please, I have resources gathering dust. Let me do something meaningful with them." Over the next hour, Marcus didn't eat another bite of his cooling dinner. Instead, he sat on the floor of his grand dining room, something he hadn't done in 30 years, while Luna crawled over his expensive suit pants and Rosa, tentatively at first and then with growing ease, told him her story through typed messages. She was 26, a single mother after Luna's father had left when the diagnosis came. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses, waitressing on weekends, and doing data entry at night after Luna slept. Her health insurance was minimal. The specialists Luna needed were expensive. Sign language classes cost money she didn't have. She was doing her best, but her best felt like drowning in slow motion. Marcus typed, "Tomorrow, I want you to take Luna to the best pediatric audiologist in the state. I'll make the appointment. I'll cover all medical expenses, hearing aids, cochlear implants if appropriate, whatever she needs. I'll pay for sign language classes for both of you, and I want you to quit your other jobs. Work for me full-time. I'll pay you what you're making from all 3 jobs combined, plus benefits." Rosa stared at the screen, then at him, then at the screen again. "Why?" she typed. "You don't know us." Marcus looked at Luna, who had fallen asleep against his chest, her tiny hand still resting against his heart. He typed slowly, "Because 20 years ago I chose money over love, isolation over connection. I thought my deafness meant I had nothing left to give. But Luna just taught me something in 5 minutes that I forgot in 20 years. That disability isn't the end of joy. That silence doesn't mean alone. That I've been the one who was truly handicapped, not in my ears, but in my heart." He paused, then added, "Please let me do this. Not for you, for me. Because I need to remember how to be human again." Rosa cried then, really cried, and Marcus awkwardly patted her shoulder while holding her sleeping baby, this strange tableau forming in a dining room that had seen nothing but loneliness for 2 decades. The next 6 months transformed Marcus Wellington's life in ways no business deal ever had. He didn't just write checks, though he did plenty of that. He showed up. He attended Luna's doctor appointments, learning alongside Rosa about the latest in hearing technology and childhood development. He enrolled in sign language classes, his old fingers fumbling through the alphabet before gradually gaining fluency. He hired Rosa as his household manager, watching her blossom with financial stability and hope. But more than that, Marcus opened his doors. His mansion, once a mausoleum of marble and silence, became a hub. He hosted dinners for families with deaf children, connecting parents and sharing resources. He established a foundation providing free hearing aids and cochlear implants to children whose families couldn't afford them. He funded sign language programs in local schools. His daughter, Sarah, who he hadn't spoken to in 7 years, saw a news article about his foundation. She called his assistant tentatively, wondering if it was real. When Marcus video chatted with her for the first time, signing "I'm sorry" over and over until they were both crying, he realized that Luna's tiny hands had unlocked more than just his heart. They'd opened a door he thought he'd welded shut forever. On Luna's first birthday, Marcus threw a party in his garden. 20 families came, children of all ages and abilities, running through the carefully manicured lawns he'd never let anyone enjoy before. Sarah was there with his 2 grandchildren he'd never met. Rosa stood beside him as Luna, wearing her new hearing aids, turned at the sound of singing and clapped her hands with delight. Marcus felt a hand slip into his. Sarah had learned basic sign language for this day. She signed, "I'm proud of you, Dad." He signed back, "A baby saved me." "Your daughter's age she was when I stopped being your father." Luna reminded me what I'd lost. As the party swirled around them, Marcus thought about that Tuesday evening that had changed everything. He'd spent 20 years dining alone in a palace of his own making, convinced that his deafness meant he had nothing left to give or receive. But a cleaning lady's baby had done the unthinkable. She'd reached through his silence, touched his face, and reminded him that the most important connections aren't made through words or sounds, but through hands that reach out, hearts that open, and the courage to let someone in. The crystal chandelier still cast fractured light across his dining room floor. But now Marcus Wellington could see that the fractures weren't flaws. They were simply different ways for the light to shine through. And in his silence, he'd finally learned to hear the only thing that ever really mattered. The sound of life being lived, of love being shared, of second chances being given not just to him, but to everyone brave enough to reach out into the darkness and touch another human soul. Luna laughed. A sound Marcus couldn't hear but could feel in every fiber of his being, and he knew that sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest miracles. You just have to be brave enough to let them reach you.